just a quick note, outside of this room, on the other side, there's a much bigger room, as you have probably noticed. Unless you want to get shot, don't go in there. Some people went in there. That's where Barack Obama is going to be, and so they're kind of nervous. So just stay on this side and everything is fine.
Okay, should we start?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Okay, so let's start with the next session. Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome. Wow. We will talk about Azure Automation DSC. My name is Aleksandar Nikolic. I'm a trainer for PowerShell and Azure. I'm also a Cloud and Data Center Management MVP and also a Microsoft Azure MVP. I'm one of the co-founders of PowerShell Magazine and the community manager of the oldest PowerShell community site, PowerShell.com. And here's my colleague, Ben Gelens.
So my name is Ben Gelens. That's the Dutch pronunciation.
Yep.
I'm a consultant working for Innovative in Dutch. CDM MVP used to be PowerShell, but they changed that. Yeah, reach out if you want to get in contact with me. I do a lot of stuff on GitHub and on Twitter, and well, you can find me if you like it.
So agenda, we will talk briefly about what Azure Automation DSC is and how to register your nodes to that service. There is different ways how to do that. Some of those are simpler, some of them are like a little bit complex, and we will spend some time on them, and then we will do a lot of demos to show you how to onboard nodes to a service, and then later how to configure nodes with Azure Automation DSC. So Azure Automation DSC is a part of Azure Automation Service. In a way, it's a DSC pool server in the cloud, completely managed service hosted by Microsoft. You also get reporting service there, not just a DSC pool server. And you can manage a variety of machines. So even name is kind of misleading, telling you that Azure Automation DSC, so you think that you can only manage Azure VMs. That's actually not true. You can manage on-premises VMs, VMs in other clouds, like Amazon or Google, doesn't matter. You can manage physical machines. You can manage Windows and Linux machines. So everything is covered, really, that you need, which is absolutely amazing.
So I think I'll take this one.
Yep.
So what you see here is actually kind of an illustration about the service. You see on the left-hand side the Azure as a service solution Microsoft has put into the Azure Automation account. We see we can use DSC resources for both authoring, but also making them available to be pulled down by the LCMs we onboard, so the local configuration managers. Those will be dropped as zip files, just as if it were a local on-premise pool server. And we can put in scripts, configuration scripts, which we can compile on the service side or on your own authoring station, have them in the service, and then assign them server-side to the nodes. So this is kind of a different concept than we're used to with desired state configuration, where actually the LCM always was responsible for pulling in its configuration. Now we can do it server-side as well. We have a REST endpoint, and that REST endpoint is available, of course, on the Azure IP space, so that's available to everybody and every server that has internet connectivity. We will show in some demos later on, we can onboard also some Linux nodes and have some configuration there as well.
So how many of you are familiar with Azure Automation DSC? Just a few, okay. How many of you are dealing with everything from PowerShell without actually going to a GUI and doing stuff? Okay. So here during the demos, we will concentrate fully on a PowerShell experience. So we might go to a GUI just to show you results, but we will try to do everything with a PowerShell. First, for those that are not very familiar with Azure Automation DSC, we will talk about terminology a little because it is slightly different than PowerShell DSC terminology, just in some ways. So DSC configuration is one of the tiles that you will see in a GUI and one of the things that you will deal as a kind of a noun part of commandlets. It allows you to define using PowerShell syntax the configuration and desired state of your VM. Then you have a DSC node configuration, which is kind of a new term in Azure Automation DSC. It's practically a MOV file or configuration document, but they use a different term here. And then we have a DSC node, just any machine that it's configured by Azure Automation DSC. It's called here the DSC node. We have a DSC resources as a building blocks for our configuration. And then we have a compilation job. So if you're familiar with Azure Automation, when we work with the runbooks, when you start a runbook, you create a job instance. And job instance takes care of execution of your runbook. Here you have a similar thing for compiling your configuration into a MOV file, into a DSC node configuration. And after that compilation job, you get the MOV file stored in the pool server and also the checksum file. But first, when you need to work with when you want to work with Azure Automation DSC or just Azure Automation, you need to create automation account and kind of configure your environment. So just let me show you how to do that. Oh. So for some people that never seen a new Azure portal, this is how it looks like. I have a few automation accounts created. Actually, I have still one that I created during testing and preparing demos for this conference. So when you click on that one, you get resources that belong to that automation account, and we will focus on DSC configuration, DSC node configuration, and DSC nodes. So the first thing that you need to do when you want to work with the PowerShell and Azure Automation DSC, you need commandlets for that. How can you get them? You can get them from PowerShell Gallery, which I prefer, or you can use a web platform installer or MSI file from a GitHub to get Azure RM commandlets. Azure Automation as a service is available in the classic portal and in new portal, but Azure Automation DSC service is only available in a new portal. Okay? So we need to work with ARM-based commandlets. So let me show you what we can do with all of them. We have pretty good coverage, but if we group them by noun, it's a little bit easier to see what we can do. So you can work with the DSC nodes and configurations. You can compile all of that from the PowerShell, which is really, really great. I like that a lot. So here, first, I will define some variables. So I will define a new name for automation account, put it in a resource group with the extension -RG, and RG, and then location West Europe. I already logged in with my account, and you can log in with Microsoft account or Azure AD account. When you work with Azure Automation and Azure Automation DC, the right way to do it is with Azure AD account. So this is the one that I've created. And the new way for actually working with Azure Automation is with Service Principal, but we don't need that for working with Azure Automation DSC. So for now, we can skip that part, but be aware that it's now a new way it's built in, and it's called Run As Account. That's really even better because it's not connected to a person, but to application and its service account. So if everything is okay, I can create a new resource group that I will put my automation account. And if my automation account is in West Europe, that doesn't mean that I can only manage resources in West Europe. That means that metadata will be stored in the West Europe region, but I can manage whatever I want from that account. As I said, not just Azure things, but also in others. So let me define now automation account. Everything works fine so far? Because when you work with Azure Automation DSC, you need very often to specify automation account name and resource group name parameters. It makes sense to use PS default parameters feature to store them once and then reuse them, because especially for demo purposes, it's much easier to read stuff because you will not deal with the very long commandlets. So I will do this thing here. Another thing that I will do now is to define some of the asset variables. Azure Automation Service has a great feature called assets. When they stored in a database, information about variables, encrypted variables, credentials, certificates. So imagine how useful that is if you compare that to your PowerShell console or PowerShell ISC that you have in your local environment. And you always struggle how to securely store your credentials, for example. So with this service, you get that there, and it's very important for you before you even start doing things to configure those variables, certificates, if you need them, to have that environment properly configured for you. Usually when you work with stuff, you need a registration key or endpoint for automation account for certain actions. And also during our demos, we will connect our machine to Operations Management Suite, another great management portal. Think about it as a System Center Operations Manager in a cloud managed by Microsoft. So our goal is to connect our machines to that. So for that, we will also need to store information about the key for OMS workspace and the URL as well. Every time when you hear about keys, you need to think about them as a password, as a secrets. So we will store them in encrypted form. So usually in documentation, in Microsoft, you will see that they will tell you, go to a site, click on the key icon and get those things, copy them, and blah, blah stuff. That doesn't work for demos, for recordings at all, but also the best practice is to deal with them through PowerShell and just don't show them. Because you heard about those global transcripts. If you have your hard-coded passwords, if you type them in a visible form, they can get also to some shared network accessible to some other admin who will periodically check the transcripts, right? So let's get registration info about automation account and create a variable for automation endpoint that we will need. It's not encrypted, it's just the endpoint. And create a primary key, which is encrypted. I know that you are probably asking yourself why they use encrypted false and true, why encrypted is not switch. I'm asking myself the same question, but this is how it is.
Well, Joe actually closed my issue yesterday on GitHub.
Okay.
And he just likes it better when...
Did that way?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, we'll also create here automation credential. And the good thing is that if you, by mistake, reveal the content of your primary automation key, there is a commandlet to regenerate new one. And it's not really a bad practice to do that by yourself on some regular schedule kind of thing, just in case. Now we need to, or not need to, but I want to create a workspace ID and a workspace key variable assets. So I will use a splatting here and create unencrypted workspace ID and then workspace primary key that we will reuse. The great thing about assets is that you can share them between your runbooks and configurations. That's really, really cool stuff. So you can define them there and then access them from runbooks or configurations, doesn't matter. You just need to reference to their names. You don't care about values. And you can, if they are encrypted, you can get them encrypted only inside of your configuration or only inside of your runbook. So that's really important. And you can use RBAC also with Azure Automation Service, so you can define, for example, automation operator that can only execute stuff without getting access to those assets. So you will have a good protection on it. So just let me show you how the things are looking now when I've created this new automation account. What I've defined is a number of assets, and those are the 4 variables that are the result of my actions, okay? Any questions? So they don't expire. You don't have a way to say, like, this password will expire in a month or 3 months. The question was, if we define a password in asset, does that password expire after some time, or can we control it? So there are a bunch of different ways to onboard nodes, or to register them to Azure Automation DSC. We are really not aware if is this the complete list of the different ways to do it. We tried our best to get through all of them and to kind of cover what you can do with certain ways of onboarding stuff. So when you think about it, you need to kind of behave differently if you work against a V1 or classic VM or V2 ARM-based VM or Linux or Windows machine. So there are some ways to do it with PowerShell, and there are some ways to do it in Portal, right? So we tried here to put them all there. The easiest one is the register Azure RM Automation DSC node, but that works only with V2 machines.
And only with VMs which are in the same subscription as the automation account.
Right, and behind those commandlets that have like registered one and the next one, set Azure RM VM DSC extension, what you really actually execute is a DSC extension that will take care of changing the settings of local configuration manager, the DSC engine. What you are doing actually, you are changing all those settings and you are setting the URLs for your pool server and reporting server. Then we have one that working with the V1 machines using DSC extension. Set Azure RM VM extension works also with Linux machines and targeting a V2 machines, and set Azure VM extension works with classic. The most complex name here, get Azure RM Automation DSC onboarding meta config, works actually with almost all of them because it will give you a meta MOV file that can you later apply to all those different VMs. Doesn't matter if they are in Azure, AWS, or on-prem, right? Or on Linux. And then we can use also ARM template that works against Linux and Windows machines. So using DSC extension with the proper settings of properties for that extension, we can use ARM templates. We will talk more about ARM templates tomorrow. And then for people that really like GUIs, they can use Azure Portal for V2 machines with the Add Azure VM button, but that button doesn't work with V1. And for V1, you need to go to Azure Portal and then settings for machines and use Azure Automation DSC extension, which is just a fancy name for DSC extension with the proper settings for onboarding to Azure Automation DSC account. Yes? Why is it that get?
So the question is, why does the get Azure RM, the long name, onboards a node? It's a getter commandlet. It's not a setter or a register.
I can take this one. So if you look at the REST endpoint of the automation account and you go there, then you will actually see that they pre-compile a metamorph and offer it as an attribute of the class they host there. So we will take that in And it's just pre-compiled text file for you, and it will be dropped on your hard drive. It's a metamorph. So you get it, but you don't set it.
You don't set it.
Yeah.
You need to set it in the next step that can be automated or kind of a manual.
I believe I have it in my demo somewhere, so
Yeah.
we'll get there.
Because practically you are fetching that MOV file. So now you will see a few demos of how to onboard certain types of VMs to a service.
And I have to stop the AV recording for a minute, so